Did you miss this year's Nonprofit Social Media Summit? Well, the recordings and all the materials are now available. This summit is designed for the small and mid-sized nonprofit and offers actionable and practical insights on how to best use social media to raise awareness and funds, even during these turbulent times. You will walk away feeling empowered and supported with strategies you can implement right away. So learn more and get instant access to all of the recordings at nonprofitsocialmediasummit.com. Thank you, and on to the show. Hello, and welcome to Nonprofit Nation. I'm your host, Julia Campbell, and I'm going to sit down with nonprofit industry experts, fundraisers, marketers, and everyone in between to get real and discuss what it takes to build that movement that you've been dreaming of. I created the Nonprofit Nation podcast to share practical wisdom and strategies to help you confidently find your voice, definitively grow your audience, and effectively build your movement. If you're a nonprofit newbie or an experienced professional who's looking to get more visibility, reach more people, and create even more impact, then you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, and welcome. Welcome back to Nonprofit Nation. This is Julia Campbell. Today, we're going to be talking all things major gifts fundraising. And I have two exceptional thought leaders with me today. I'm very excited. The first is Gail Perry, a philanthropy leader, keynote speaker, and author with more than 30 years experience, renowned for her positivity, expertise, and insight. And her company, Gail Perry Group, helps nonprofits reach extraordinary fundraising and capital campaign goals. And Beth Ann Locke is director of the Academy of the Gail Perry Group and chief spark at the Fundraiser Coach. Beth Ann brings over 30 years of accomplished fundraising experience in the US and Canada. And they are two colleagues and friends of mine, Gail and Beth Ann. I'm so happy to have you on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here. How you doing, Julia?
I'm doing great. I am doing really well. I know that both of you are doing really well. We have some pretty exciting things to talk about today. I know that Major Gifts fundraising has been in the news, especially with the Fundraising Effectiveness Project coming out showing that while individual and smaller gifts are potentially down, major gifts are only growing. But we do know that the major gift landscape is changing. And I think that we can all agree nonprofits' kind of fundraising future depends on this robust revenue stream. But what we're here today to talk about, which is so exciting, is the old way to ask for gifts and the new way to ask for gifts. And Gail, I want you to kind of tee this up for us and set us up. It's this framework that you've come up with.
Okie dokie. Well, we're going to talk about the old-fashioned ask for major contribution to a capital campaign or to a project at your organization. And then we're going to talk about something we call the new way, the gift conversation. So it's the old-fashioned way and the new conversation. And it's really interesting. The old-fashioned ask was sort of born, Beth Ann, do you think in the 70s and 80s when you have a pitch and you have a script?
Sure, when it moved from volunteers,
like a pitch deck,
yes, or even just a way you had a script of asking.
We would rehearse our major ask, and I remember I wrote it all out. Like one person says this, and one person says that, and then we time it out, and then so and so is going to make the ask, and if that person chickens out, the other person will make the ask.
I do remember this too.
You remember the script, Julia?
Oh, yes. When I was a development director, we would have a whole pitch deck and a little folder, and we would rehearse, like you just said, like it was a play.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, let me tell you a story, and this story comes from my dear, much admired friend, Andrea Kilstedt. She said once that she was friends with a major donor couple who lived in the Midwest, and they were very philanthropic. And there's one university they were affiliated with, and they had named a building in the previous campaign. So when the university was planning their next campaign, they really looked at this couple for possibly a lead gift, and they were top of the prospect list, this couple. And so the couple's friend was on the board of trustees, and the friend said, would y'all like to hear about the campaign? And of course, the couple said, yes, we'd love to hear about the campaign. We're very interested. And so the president of the university came, the head of the board of trustees, and their friend. 3 people came, and they were so rehearsed in their presentation that they never once asked the donor couple one question.
Oh, no.
It was all one way. It was a pitch. And the donor couple loved this university, and they knew these people involved. And the lady said to Andrea later, she said, I've never felt so demeaned in my life. And they didn't give a cent to the campaign. They were so offended. So we have taken these kinds of stories and our own experiences. I have blown a couple of have you ever blown a major capital campaign ask, Beth Ann? I have.
Well, I haven't been in as many as yours. So I know when you've done thousands, it's easy to have 1 or 2 go astray.
We have been thinking and working a lot on this new approach to donors when it comes time for a really, really big gift. We're talking 6, 7, 8, 9-figure gifts, the kind of gifts that are transformational to the organization. And one thing we find, and Beth Ann, you probably agree, is that the fundraisers want to take charge. We want to be in charge of this donor and this ask, and we're going to script it and we're going to make it happen because we are so important. And sometimes the donor ends up feeling a little bit manipulated or even hit up when they're approached like that. What do you think, Beth Ann?
Well, it's not relationship based, really. It's coming really at a
transactional,
as a wanting, as a taking, extractive almost in its nature. So, and it's why the gift conversation and the new way of asking, Gail, is really about what people are interested in and seeing the donor as a whole person and not a pile of money.
Exactly. It's like a first date where no one asks, where the person doesn't ask you any questions.
That's right.
Just talks about how great they are. It's like, what?
Adios.
Seriously.
But one of the big changes in the old way and the new way to ask is the pace of the conversation usually happens over a period of time. There are warm-up conversations with the donor, discovery conversations with the donor, engagement conversations with the donor, and often the major gift is sort of discussed little by little. There's not often that moment in time when you're having the big pitch. Have you run into that, Beth Ann?
Yes, because actually you're understanding what they're more interested in, not for the donor to drive where they're giving, but so you can shape the conversation around their values and interests.
Also, we have been thinking a lot at Gail Perry Group about the concept of emotion. And I wrote a blog post, I think last year, about mushy donors who have great big hearts and who have all these feelings. I find that donors feel deeply, passionately about the causes they're supporting, and they have a lot of stuff going on in their belly and their heart and their head about this work. And when a fundraiser approaches them in a very scripted way that's not engaging, it's so disappointing. It fails to engage the donor's heart.
So what has changed? Why is the old model no longer working? What do you think has shifted either generationally or in society? Why this was maybe supposedly working for a while was what we were all taught, and why the shift?
Well, I believe it's because the generations and the way they were raised and the expectations have shifted. So when you think of, older generation, especially sort of the first group of the silence, it was about hierarchy, and it was about doing things for the community because it was the right thing. So you got these sort of institutional giving, the opera, the library, the hospital. And I think with the boomers, where there was an idea of their voice, both as children being raised and their interests being paid attention to, and as a big group, it started being about what we would also like, about our interests, and not just giving to the hospital in unrestricted because that's what you should do. It's about, where do I want to make an impact? And now, as younger generations, I don't think they should even feel like they have to do. They want to do it in ways that are meaningful for them. And that takes conversation.
That's right. Donors are showing up on our doorsteps with ideas about the impact they want to make. So I would say, Beth Ann, that we're having more activist donors who really do want to participate in directing their money to where they feel most satisfied. And also something else has changed. I think we get better at fundraising every decade. There's new research, there are new approaches. And with all of the talk about emotional intelligence and social intelligence and the ability to read the other people, read the room, and react to what's happening, that creates a more flexible ask that is much more donor-centered and focused on the donor and how they're reacting than the one-up ask that is very, very straightforward and very controlled.
Oh, I love calling it the one-up ask. Now, I know you're releasing this framework. It will be released at the time of this recording, and you are doing a webinar all around the old way to ask, the new way to ask. That's going to be at gailperrygroup.com if you're interested, listeners. But can you tell me some specifics about the sort of the new framework that you're teaching?
Yes. Well, one thing is the difference between a formal and an informal conversation. The scripted ask is very formal, and you got a timetable. And often in my past, when I shot myself in the foot on big ask, I didn't build in the questions to ask the donor, to engage them. And as time progressed, I now teach people and fundraisers that if you talk more than 50% of the time, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And that, I think, is a very big shift from the old sort of manipulative pitch, presentation-oriented ask. What do you think, Beth Ann?
Yes. And one of the other shifts is really going, like you said, from organizational centric to what we sometimes call donor centered. And I know the phrase donor centered has gone out of favor, but what we're talking about is almost really consent based or permission based. So we're not driving, steamrolling over the donor to get what we want, or even just to, ask them just for the money. People aren't themselves money. They have resources. And so I think thinking of it about moving into that, consent-based or permission-based, which is really what we should be doing in many areas of our lives. I think that really helps you shift from just talking about yourselves to engaging in conversation.
For example, here's some before and afters. Formal versus informal, fast versus slow, pitch versus asking questions, talking all about money rather than talking about possibilities and impact, organization-centered versus donor-focused, pushy versus permission. Let's talk about permission, Beth Ann.
Yes, we, especially in the Major Gifts Intensive, which is a course that we offer once a year, this is really about asking the donor at every step of the way, may I tell you more about the program that we're starting? I think it may align with your interests. Would you like to talk now about the gift we discussed earlier this summer? It gives the donor kind of a, that branching logic. Sometimes they'll say no, but most often they say yes and can feel like they are then in charge because they are in how the conversation moves along. And I think it's just, you could call it more genteel, you could call it more polite, but it really is more based on them as people.
I teach that when I teach marketing. Everything should be permission-based. You should not be spamming people. You should not be signing people up for your email list. You should not be purchasing email lists from people that don't want to hear from you. You should not be trying to beat people over the head with your message if they are not interested and they don't want to hear it. You should be talking to people that want to be talked to about things that they care about. So I agree.
Bingo. That's the way we raise big money, isn't it?
What kinds of questions should we be asking in these conversations in the new model?
Ooh, we have lots of questions. And I do want to put a little plug in for the Major Gifts Intensive.
Coming in 2025.
A four-month course that we teach every year, first part of the year, and Beth Ann's in charge of the program. But it's designed for a fundraising team. It's not just one person. And so we want a whole team from a university or an organization to embrace this model that includes the old way and the new way to ask. It includes the training on permission, includes training on discovery conversations, and all the kind of questions that you ask the donor in order to get them ready for that big gift conversation. So encourage anybody who wants to find out more. We'll be posting a link, and you can sign up for our newsletter that comes out on Friday. And
it's a great newsletter.
You can find out all about the program when we update it every year. So let's talk about some of these questions. Beth Ann, you want to talk about some of the questions we cover?
Sure. I mean, I first just want to reemphasize the one-shot ask puts a lot of pressure on fundraisers. You know, the idea that your boss is coming to you and we need to get that 25K, that kind of speaking about donors, whereas, you know, you have that at the office in front of the donor or on the phone or however you're messaging. It's really about the impact. Donors want to make impact. I always, when I coach, people don't have $10,000 laying around, or if they do, they're not just handing it over. What can I do? What's important to me to make an impact? And that's why having multiple conversations is so important, because you start to discover what those are and why they're already interested in what you're doing. And it's how we get a no ask, as we call it sometimes, right? Where you're just having conversations and the donor says, what do you need to get this done? Or how can I help? And that's why multiple conversations make it easier, because almost the donor is so curious in making that. And just tell me what you need. One of the questions is, we might just ask is, I love to ask, you know, tell me more about what, you know, has lit you up or made you excited about your last gift. Because of course you've been giving impact reports. You know, you start to hear what's important. Maybe it's the numbers, maybe it's the way it was done. And then you get to move into different discussions around that. So, well, we actually have more need in the community. We could potentially reach, you know, twice as many kids, but we need to scale and double. Let me tell you a little bit more about that. Would you like to hear about it? And that's how people start moving into being partners with you instead of passive listeners. And that is such an important shift.
Bingo, Beth Ann, because I think the old-fashioned ask views the donor as a passive object, to be
a resource only. Yes.
As opposed to the new approach. And I will say that the largest gifts at the largest mega campaigns around the world have always followed this approach. Slow, engaging the donor in every step, asking the donor to share their heart. I mean, the successful major transformational gifts have followed this approach. One of the challenges we see is that board members think that fundraising is all about asking. And also new CEOs who are directing fundraising programs think is get out there and ask. And so a lot of what our mission has been in the world is try to redefine what an ask really is and how it needs to operate in order to be successful. Because we can't look at the donor as an object. We have to, using permission, we bring them step by step along the way, and they are agreeing, yes, I'm interested in this project. Yes, I want to learn more. Yes, this project is deeply meaningful to me, and this is why. Yes, my family has philanthropic conversations around the Thanksgiving dinner table, and yes, we might want to talk about this. Yes, you may send us a proposal, or yes, I'd like to know right now how I can help. I wouldn't say we're manipulating the donor to get this point, but the donor is actively engaged in the conversation, saying yes the whole time. And therefore, when you say, would you like to know how you can help? Would you like to help? The donor says yes. And it's a whole lot easier to ask. I call it the kinder, gentler, much more fun, and much more successful.
I see it like an invitation. You're talking about this awesome party, but you're just saying, oh, I know that you really like, just think about Halloween. I know you really like dressing up in costume. I know you really like Halloween. Would you be interested in learning more about this party? And then they say yes. And then you say, okay. And it's like an invitation into something that's fun and that is actually meaningful and that the donor is excited and motivated and inspired to be a part of. I think that's amazing. My next question, for the fundraisers out there that are listening to this podcast saying, okay, this all sounds great, but let's dive more into what you were just talking about, Gail, the board members and the ED. How do we change the culture of transactional fundraising? I know you are attempting to do this and transform the philanthropy and the sector, but how can an individual fundraiser, what are some steps they can take to sort of move out of the old way and into the new way if they're getting pushback?
Yeah, well, educating people who think they know more than you do can be challenging.
Yes.
But one thing that's really worked for me lately when I'm working with the board is that I'm trying to educate them, not teach, but educate them about how we do fundraising these days. I'll ask the board members, what happens if somebody asks you for a gift too quickly or too soon before you're ready? What happens if we rush to the ask? And I stop and let them think about it. And every single person in the room will nod and say, you don't get as much.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to do adult education, you can't just speak at people and expect them to understand. You have to engage them in a conversation so that they are working with the material in their brains. And so I really like the Q&A. I'll tell you something else. I was doing a board retreat for one of our hospital clients last month, and I did a lot. I was teaching them about how this process works, and they're nodding and they're talking about the case for support and everything. And then I say, well, let me do a role play to wrap up. Who would like to volunteer to do a role play? And I promise you, I won't directly ask you for a gift, but I'll take you right up to the point. And so the most wealthy lady in the room raised her hand to come to the role play with me. And I knew her family had named the new wing of the hospital, and she was their number one prospect. And there I was, I had this opportunity right in front of the board. And she was all excited. You know, we've been talking about fundraising a couple of hours, and she was all in on it and very gung-ho. And I said, so Lisa, tell me why your family is so committed to the hospital. I mean, she gave a case for support that almost made me weep, and I'm a pro. And then I said, my second question was, what resonates with you most about the work here, or what areas of the hospital are of the strongest interest to you? Well, it turned out there are 3 areas that, the wound clinic. Turned out the wound clinic saved her father's foot. Who knew? Nobody knew.
If you didn't ask, you wouldn't know.
That's right. And I'm just fishing for information, and all of a sudden this comes out. And it's a dramatic story. Board members are sitting on the edge of their seats listening to this story, getting all into this hospital and how important it is to the community. And then I say, would you like to learn more about the wound clinic and how well they're doing? She said, yes, I would. And then I said, would you be interested in doing more? She looked at me and she didn't say anything. And she looked at me again. She said, I just might, and I almost fell on the floor because, there she is opening the door to a seriously big gift conversation. I just asked a few questions and made her do all the talking.
So how do we get the confidence to be Gail Perry or Beth Ann Locke? How do we get the confidence? I remember being a director of development, and I never had studied fundraising, and I was kind of thrown to the wolves a little bit. My executive director was not very supportive, was very much like, go into your tower and just go make your asks, go to your lunches, go to your annual appeals and things like that. And I do have a lot of confidence. I'm a public speaker and I do have confidence, but I do know a lot of people are introverts or they're not sure, they have imposter syndrome. How can we build that confidence to ask for these big gifts, knowing that, of course, like a 10K gift is very different from a 100K gift, but where can we start?
I like to remind fundraisers that they are wearing the mantle or the coat, of the organization. They are not just coming in as themselves. They're wearing the legacy of a current donor's relationship with the organization. That's the very first thing they should remember. I know some people are new. That's very difficult, either new to fundraising or new to the organization, but you have the legitimacy of the organization behind you. And getting into conversation with that strength and you yourself believing in the mission. I mean, if you don't believe in the mission, you truly have to find another place to go where it has a mission you believe in. Starting from that and the joy that the donor has hopefully already experienced in giving and having those in your one back pocket. And the other back pocket is knowing a little bit about the donor. So hopefully there's some notes you can read. If not, come with an interest in bringing that donor to a point of joy. They've already given. You're going to reflect back that with part of, your last year's gift did this if they haven't gotten a report, or, thank you again. You were able to support X, Y, and Z. And then know what you're asking for. So if you haven't had much conversation, see this as the first of 3 conversations. Don't put the pressure to get the money. Getting the money puts you in that scarcity mindset. And that honestly is deadly.
Oh, the scarcity mindset, right?
Yes.
I have few tips too on developing confidence. I like to suggest to beginning or young, newer fundraisers that they start with making thank you visits and practicing some of these questions, which are really just discovery questions in thank you visits, because the stakes are very, very low. And also equipping them with a set of questions. We have one participant in our Major Gifts Intensive. She took our series of questions for the conversational ask, and she posted them on her computer screen. And you remember the story, Beth Ann? Yes. And she was making thank you phone calls, and she knew the questions to ask the donor. He was making a $1,000 a year gift. And he up and said, I want to make a $100,000 gift to support this.
Wow.
I'll just say it was a woman donor.
Oh, it was a woman. Okay,
yes, it was a woman.
If you have these questions, you can fall back on them and just make the donor to do all the talking, which lowers the pressure on yourself. Another thing is that this whole concept of emotional intelligence is really fascinating to us. And as I understand it, it means that you sort of know enough about yourself and your triggers and how you operate that you can be aware of how you're acting and you can sort of control yourself. And so I do think making yourself comfortable, in the chair and feeling confident in how you look, and all of those things give you more confidence when you're interacting with the donor and being able to really focus on them rather than yourself. What do you think, Beth Ann? You agree with that?
I'm just going to add to Julia. You mentioned about introverts versus extroverts, and I would truly emphasize that fundraising is not a profession for extroverts. It is a profession for people.
Right.
And there are donors who actually love talking to an introvert. They like their quiet. They like their, not so much energy radiating out of them. And as an extrovert person, one of the things I've had to do is to, when I'm with the donor, is to understand what they are as early on in the conversation as I can. So I'll sit back more instead of leaning forward. I definitely ask for that glass of water because I know it will slow the pace of my conversation. If I feel like I'm going too fast, I'll just drink more. It's a problem toward the end of the meeting, of course. But and in a Zoom, I will also have a glass of water that I lift so people know that I'm going to potentially drink while we're chatting, because it is my number one way of slowing down. So just basic things.
You don't come in like guns blazing, like it calms you down, it centers you.
Accountants, lawyers, they're not into this yada yada. Their time is money, and I need to kind of go at their pace and also make sure I'm very mindful. If I've said I'm meeting for a half hour, I got a 25-minute meeting, So there are little tricks you can use too.
Yeah. And, I do want to say that there are some occasions when the donor wants a pitch, but you find that out ahead of time.
Right.
and you're prepared. And, some of these really, really, really busy and very wealthy people will give you a half an hour and that's it. And so you have to be able to adapt. But even so, if I was going to do a pitch and I had a half an hour, I would make the donor start by telling me why they care about this organization. I would still do that and ground it so the donor is with me together in the conversation rather than me just talking to them.
What advice do you have for an organization that's just starting out, sort of cultivating major gifts? That is maybe a younger organization, or they have not had a major gifts program. Maybe they've hired a new major gifts officer. What is kind of the first step?
One thing we sometimes encounter, Gail and I working with people at the Major Gifts program, is they've had a direct mail program and the donors are used to having direct mail contact. And as you start to reach out, they're a little bit like, oh, why are they calling me? They must want something, that kind of feeling. So this is another, starting to call and thank, having your board call and thank. So people start getting used to different platforms. Yes. So important, because when you haven't contacted people and you start contacting people, it is a big shift in an organization. So I think it's an important human thing to do, is to have human contact with your human donors or corporate and foundation donors. That's the first thing, is start doing the easy contacts. Like Gail said, calling and thanking, checking in to see how the summer went, or different things like that are conversational. People are suspicious when you just start reaching out and talk. You've gotten a text from an organization. You're like, how'd they get my number?
A friend you haven't seen in 5 years, and you're like, reaches out. You're immediately like, what do they want?
Yes. So that's one thing. Gail, what else do you have?
Well, I really rely on the thank you calls and, practice your discovery questions with thank you visits and calls. And, you're just building a major gift program, major donor network. You have to develop your prospect list, your pipeline, your portfolio. And one of the best ways is to, start with your list of donors and try to determine who are the most loyal and passionate donors with capacity. And there are all sorts of ways to do that. We do recommend a lot of time focusing in on figuring out who the right people are, because fundraisers only have so much time, and you really want to use your time wisely. Therefore, you don't just willy-nilly. I mean, all the donors deserve as much love as you can possibly spare them.
That's
and
right.
Send them, period. However, and in addition, you want to focus particularly on some people who have deep pockets and wealth capacity who really, really love your work and might like to get more involved. So those are the ones we're really looking for to help create some transformational funding for nonprofit missions. We need more money for our missions. There's no question about it.
I see it as giving them that option, giving them that gift to give a gift, giving them that opportunity. Right. You talked about that the donor that you made a thank you call and went from $1,000 to $100,000. Do you see a lot of wealthier donors or people that could potentially be major gift donors kind of testing the waters in that way?
I'll tell you a little bit more about that because it was somebody I'd coached. So, for them, a $10,000 gift, it was a girls' Catholic school, a neighborhood school. And they just had really done great thanking for people in the Bronx. And, usually people move away from their hometown. As they moved away, they were kind of too far to call, right? So they had great thank yous for people sort of in New York and not so great afterwards. So I said, you need to start calling every single $1,000 donor. That is
especially if they don't live there, because they probably have a great story.
Hello. So, and actually they then, Gail, through the Major Gifts Intensive, they did the wealth screening. This woman, I'm going to tell you, has a very unusual last name, and she kept her maiden name. So they could have found her if they'd Googled her. She actually lives in Seattle. I recognize the husband immediately because I'm from Seattle. So she said, oh, I know she sends a gift in, let's just say it was maybe every June. And I think maybe the gift's coming. I said, call and thank her anyways. If you haven't thanked her for a year, you need to start calling to thank. The woman really said, I'm so glad. She didn't answer. Person hung up. Always leave a message. Always leave a message. She got a 206 call right away after that. And it was this woman. She said, it's really nice to hear from you. And so she sort of, thank you for what you've done. And we're thinking about doing this for the new students. And she said, I'd like to make that $100,000 gift. Now, this is an amazing gift. It's an amazing leap. It's now her annual gift.
Wow.
It's now her annual gift. And so it seems fantastical, but when the donor, especially I think for things like schools, universities, where there's been a relationship, where there's been growth, people feel strongly. And if you don't open the door to a conversation about why that is meaningful, my suggestion to her was they had 4 values of the school: compassion, et cetera, et cetera. I said to her, ask which of the 4 values you've been leaning into most this last year.
Ooh, wow.
That was the question she asked as the discovery question. And, that sparks people right back to, high school is an important time of growth. There are other times, but that can be a really key transition moment for a lot of people. So that's what, and as you know, from Adrienne Sargent and Jen Chang, this identity portion is so important. People's identity as to why they give and what it means as they develop their own identity of themselves and away from other parts of themselves. So I think those kinds of questions are really important when you work with an organization that works in those deep feeling or growth areas. Hospitals are one of them. Universities are another one.
They want to feel that connection no matter where they're living.
Yeah.
I want to say too that our Major Gifts Intensive, just this 4-month coaching and training program, we have know of at least 2 $1 million gifts that were thrown at our clients without a formal ask based on this approach. And there have been many 6-figure gifts. We continue to be stunned at the results that large and small organization fundraisers are able to achieve with this approach. It really works.
I love that. Oh my gosh. Thank you both so much for being here. This is absolutely fantastic. Where can people learn about the Major Gifts Intensive? Follow the blog, follow on all the socials.
Yes. And I think it's
majorgiftscoaching.com.
That's right.
Majorgiftscoaching.com. Okay.
Yes.
And GailPerryGroup.com.
Yes.
That's right. And Gail's got a great blog, and you also are very active on LinkedIn, so you can find lots of great information if you go to the Gail Perry Group or go to Gail Perry herself. We just really know that there are so many people with resources who want to make the world a better place. And we know that fundraisers are often the bridge to the organizations. And what a beautiful thing it is to invite people to make an amazing difference in their community, in the lives of others. That's the word we want to spread.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being on the podcast. I'm sure everyone's going to be checking out the links. And just keep changing the world. I really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for this.
Thank you for inviting us. Yes. It's great to see you.
Well, hey there. I wanted to say thank you for tuning into my show and for listening all the way to the end. If you really enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, and you'll get new episodes downloaded as soon as they come out. I would love if you left me a rating or a review, because this tells other people that my podcast is worth listening to. And then me and my guests can reach even more earbuds and create even more impact. So that's pretty much it. I'll be back soon with a brand new episode. But until then, you can find me on Instagram at JuliaCampbell77. Keep changing the world, you nonprofit unicorn.